and karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, ihi akia ngata atukura, ye hio, ye huka, ye hohu, tihei, mauri ora. Let us affirm today that we as councillors will work together to serve the citizens of Selwyn District, to always use our gifts of understanding, courage, common sense, wisdom and integrity in all our discussions, dealings and decisions so that we may solve problems effectively. May we always recognise each other's values and opinions, be fair-minded and ready to listen to each other's point of view. In our dealings with each other, let us always be open to the truth of others and ready to seek agreement, slow to take offence and always prepared to forgive. May we always work to enhance the well-being of Selwyn District and its communities. We will. Thanks very much for everyone's attendance today, full attendance at the meeting. No apologies. So we're here at the 11th of August. Welcome to those that are online watching this via IT. Are there any conflicts of interest that need to be raised? Councillor Hassan? Any other conflicts people would like to raise? Yeah, all the standing items that we have already listed are fine. We were to have a public forum today from Inspector Peter Cooper. He requested that that be moved and will join us hopefully next month for a report from the police. Confirmation of minutes. Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Seconder for those, Councillor Lyle. Any discussion on the minutes from the 28th of July? All those in favour that they be recorded as true and accurate, say aye. Against, declare it carried. Matters under investigation. There's a report back 25th of August around trade waste soil testing. Let me get to my report, which is on page 16. A number of items here that I just thought I'd highlight. Many of them you are already aware of, but as a matter of recording them, I thought it would be good to have here, and a few opportunities for involvement and to have some ongoing involvement and advocacy for our community. So firstly, just thinking about Rolleston to Wharikakaho flyover and the plans that NZTA Waka Kotahi are currently in consultation with the community about. I have received a lot of negative feedback from the community about where the current plans sit. And a number of individuals and businesses requesting changes be made. My advice to those groups so far has been, this is exactly the type of feedback that Waka Kotahi is looking for. We're at the very early stages of them developing something. They have a draft that they have consulted on, and it's not meeting what you expect, so please let Waka Kotahi know that. I know that there are also a number of views from councillors, and we need to come up with a submission to the process. The submission time closes early next week, and so just request if you do have things that you would like to comment on from ourselves, that you give those to Bernadette by the close of business on Friday this week, so that we can draft up something that can be then circulated. Can't thank you, Councillor Alexander, for already feeding back on that. It's appreciated to have that as a starting point for the discussion. And it's, I guess, part of it for us is thinking about the investment that's going to be here, but we want to be sure that that investment actually gets the desired outcomes for our community, not just for those that are here now, but also into the future. So, yeah, if you do have views on that, please let us know. Second item, I've just mentioned the welcome to Waikirikiri Selwyn signs. There's been a bit of discussion between Taumusho and ourselves about wording and language, and our design team have come up with the signs that are there. So thank you for Stephen and his team for that. The plan is that there would be a number of entrances and exits from our district that would have these signs, but in the first instance, getting something on the new motorway will be the first sign. That follows on to some discussions around speed, particularly in townships with meetings that I've had. There's a follow-up to the Prebleton submission where they came to council a couple of months ago, and they asked Malcolm and myself to meet with them a week ago now, 10 days ago, to identify actions since that meeting and where things could be improved. And it just so happened that there were two other communities that also over the same sort of 5-day period, raised similar concerns in both Waddington and Springston. And I'm sure those communities aren't alone in these thoughts, but the general view was that signage doesn't meet their expectations. Speeds don't necessarily meet their expectations either, and that our ability to listen and be flexible didn't meet what they were expecting as well. So as far as speeds go, there's a process that we run through. When it comes to signage, I think that we do need to think about our signage and having some consistency across the district. There was each of the meetings all highlighted West Melton and what West Melton had, and could they have something similar. I think their views, they weren't so worried about thresholds and entering into towns and things, but just decent signs saying that you were coming into a town, and also painting red or white on the road so you were crossing something as you entered the town was also something that all three communities wanted to advocate for, and to think about how we might move a sign 50, 100 metres down the road that sent messages earlier than just right on the borders of towns. So I've noted here the key concerns that were raised in those meetings, and then asked that the next transport report to council just identify either what can or can't be done and the process for doing either of those things. So not expecting that we'll have a large debate on that today, but let's think about what staff responses come up in that space. And two other things. Water reform is obviously high on not only our agenda, but all of councils across New Zealand, and a lot of community concern around where the water reform process is heading. There's been, I think, some disingenuous advertising put out by DIA and the government early on, talking about things that were just blatantly untrue around the current state of water and where we were heading with water. Maybe they represented somewhere else, but there was nowhere in Selwyn that I knew looking like what the ads were portraying, and we asked them to be removed, and they were slowly, but they didn't do a lot to build confidence and feeling like there was a really strong partnership around what a conversation around change might look like. It's last week I met with the mayors of the South Island, and we also met with some leadership from Ngāi Tahu to discuss where things are at. And it felt that the meeting in the morning was the mayors of the South Island. There was a huge variety of views as to whether this was a good or a bad change for council, or for their council and for their communities. A lot of it focused on the loss of local voice, which is an important part of thinking about the change, and the quality of data, and the total amount of data that's available. And while there is lots of data there, it's actually really hard to find the stuff that speaks to the issue clearly without having to wade through hundreds of pages of documents in a report, which is fine for you or I, but if we're trying to connect information to the community, that's actually a reasonably difficult thing to do. I'm not sure how many of you have visited the DIA website. There's a great page that's got links to everything, but for you to know which link to actually click on and then where to find an each report is actually, there's almost too much information to have a good, clear conversation on this. There's been a key couple of pieces of information that was shared with the mayors of the South Island as well, and we talked about it during the meeting, and I've shared them with councillors and attached them to the back of this report. Firstly, there's the advice from Taitoura Internal Affairs and LGNZ around Three Waters guidance for council over the next 8 weeks. So there's been a lot of conversation in the community around what decisions need to be made now, and this document provides guidance around that and what this time period is for, really focusing on this is a chance to understand the data, what it means for us, and to advocate for any particular changes we might like to see in the current proposals, and to understand what the government is offering as a part of that as well. The second piece of attachment is around just reinforming the size of the entities, where the entities sit, and the boundaries. That's on your desk today, and a system for proposed Three Waters delivery, which has the layout of the proposed structure of the new entities. We finished with, at the end of that first meeting, we had a discussion around the things that we held in common to land on. They included that the mayors in the room had an open mind to see where the journey with Ngāi Tahu in the afternoon and where the future information shared by government would go, so that we weren't trying to close down discussion but continue to have it and to have understanding. That we wanted to get ourselves into the best place we could if it was mandated that we were all in, or should we all end up deciding that we chose to be in, we wanted to get ourselves into the best place that we could. We wanted to think about co-creation with Ngāi Tahu, to understand that if there's going to be something that's jointly governed, there needs to be some understanding before we get into the process about what will be governed and what that would look like. We wanted to be able to retain local bespoke delivery, including issues that focused on chlorine for those around the Greater Christchurch area, but also around rural supplies and the nuances that sit within each council, that when you amalgamate together, often you can lose that the small local thing that actually matters to the community that's there. We wanted to set up regular meetings and opportunities for feedback to the wider audience, so to come together on the things that we could be together on and actually be able to talk about those quite widely. We wanted to ensure that there was going to be a workforce pipeline into the future. Not only is there heavy demand now for people working in the water space, but the new entity model suggests that there's about twice as many people going to be required going forward. And we wanted to ensure that there were opportunities for New Zealanders to be trained and employed in these roles locally, rather than thinking about how we get open borders and then bring people in from overseas to fill these roles, which may be needed as well. But let's think about our local workforce in a way for our young people to want to get into these things into the future. So those were the items that we held in common. And when we sat down with Ngāi Tahu in the afternoon, PwC was supporting, and there were a few issues raised in that meeting which we wanted to delve further in on. It became clear that the DIA's thinking was a lot further advanced than where the mayors had thought that we were up to, thinking about shadow board members, thinking about what transition looks like into legislation through the early stages of next year. And it appears that they're doing a lot of the work that I guess we're thinking about doing around, should this be mandated or should it end up all in? Let's have ducks in a row before we get there, rather than having to scramble should that decision be made. And so there's a further meeting in about 2 weeks' time on the 24th, I think, John, is it, with the mayors of the South Island and the Ngāi Tahu group to advance some of that thinking. And we've invited LGNZ and DIA to be a part of that and to inform that process. Alongside of that, LGNZ has proposed a number of supports for councils, and David and I have agreed to bring people here to us to be able to understand where those discussions are at, the things that we need to be thinking about locally, and to be supported with the expertise that LGNZ is paying for, rather than having to pay for it ourselves. And so we're not doubling up on any information gathering. And I sent a link earlier in the week to councillors, and we can reload it in the minutes of this meeting, which was a LGNZ hosted webinar talking to those that had peer reviewed the Wix data. As Ferrier Swear and Maureen Becker, I think, were the two that were there, and talking through the data, the reliability of the data, from their view, an independent look at what Rick's assumptions were, and some things that we might want to consider as local councils as well. So if you haven't had a look at that, it's about an hour long, and I suggest you do, because there was some good information held in that as well. David, is there anything else in the water space you wanted to add?
No, look, I think the important thing is that the new entity's proposals focus on perceived benefits 30 years from now. As we know, it's incredibly difficult to forecast with any accuracy out to that period. For us internally, we continue to receive a plethora of information, to spend a lot of dedicated time analysing that and sharing that with everybody. We're receiving invites to webinars on a weekly basis, both at governance level that the Mayor has referred to, but also at operational level as well. And finally, from an internal staff perspective, Murray, Washington and I hold fortnightly meetings in the chamber with our staff every Monday afternoon. So staff are fully apprised in terms of what's going on as well. But we just continue to watch what's happening in the space. And next step is to invite the LGNZ review group to come down and meet with us, and also to review the work that we've done behind the scenes as well, just to make sure that they concur with our findings thus far. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So we'll continue to ramp up our information sharing for the community, including regular videos and information on single sheets if we can, that distill things down so that it can be well understood. I'm suggesting we set up a working group of interested councillors to be a part of a meeting, probably weekly, or maybe fortnightly, on this one issue, probably keeping the meetings as short as we can, 20 minutes, half an hour, but regular, so that any changes can be absorbed by the group. And the first meeting might need to be a bit longer because there's a huge amount of information currently. But just thinking how we create something that's nimble enough to be across the issues, supported by key staff, David, Murray, Kelvin, and Stephen. So I don't know if any councillors are interested in being a part of that group, but would invite you to nominate yourselves to be in. And let's create something that means we continue to stay ahead of the game. And also note that there's been a lot of inquiries that have received around consultation. The Mayor of Westland suggested a referendum. The language, and it was put before the Mayors again, the language that we use is important because each of those words has quite a different meaning. As well as just listening to the community and feedback also means something. So we need to think carefully about the stage that we're in and at what point we do want to engage the community at those different levels of engagement. Note that today there's a notice of motion on the table, and suggest maybe we take that after my report, which confirms that we would consult with our community before any decisions made, which is absolutely the right thing to do. This is a major piece of council infrastructure. I don't think we could, we shouldn't want to do that, and I don't think legally we could do that. But let's confirm to our community that we are wanting to make sure that their voices, we are informed by their voices, and the decision making is not just done in this room, but done in consultation with everyone. To do that, there does need to be good sharing of information, hence setting up this other group. And so I want to thank Councillor Miller and Councillor Alexander for moving and seconding that notice of motion. And we can either take that as a separate item or just attach it as a motion after we receive my report, which might be cleaner because it's a notice of motion that sits there as a separate item. So afterwards, yeah. So that's on water. I'll just lastly mention the Selwyn Awards and say what a great night. Selwyn Awards were 450 people there, over 100 nominations, a great time of celebration, and a really smoothly run event. So right from the beginning around the process to get people involved, bringing in sponsors, and there's going to be a bit of a presentation later around it. But wanted to just highlight Kelsey on behalf of a team that have pulled together something pretty spectacular. And every time it comes around, I don't know how you feel, Kelsey, about running something that's that big or has the potential to get that big. But there's always that, what if no one buys into this? You know what? You want it to be a success, but what if it's not? There's always in the back of my head. And so just to see the way you pulled a team together with, it requires a lot more than you, but it does require someone who's at the pointy end of lots of things. It's been a big project for you and the staff. And I don't have enough chocolate to give to everyone that was involved. So on behalf of myself and the councillors here, I just want to say thank you for an amazing event, for showcasing just the best of our district and across a huge range of Olympic term disciplines, but disciplines the wrong word to use. But we've got so many great people that are in community, youth, sports, business, resiliency, the environment, and it was really nice early too. Sitting next door to Liz Brown, and for them to receive an award as part of it kind of just showed some of the journey that we've been on and as a district around highlighting things. So well done to you and the team.
Just before you start again.
The last thing on my report is some of the meetings that I've attended, and we just need to add a B to the resolution, which would be to appoint an alternate to the Orion AGM should I not be able to attend at the moment. We've only got one person there. and it will just make sense to have a second alternate. Councillor Hassan.
Yes, just with regards to your meetings, 29th of July, you met with the Springston residents regarding their speed limits in their township. Can you give us an update, please?
Yep, that's what I mentioned earlier. So met with one member of the Springston Township who had done a lot of work and actually made his own speed recording device, invested a lot of his own time and money in doing that, had been speaking to police, has spoken to our staff, and was interested in basically speed and safety of those travelling through the town rather than to the town. Yeah, and so that will be it'll be reported to us through the transport report next month.
Tēnā rā tātou, thank you very much, Your Worship, for your report. I guess just on the speed meetings that you've had, I wonder if there's opportunity for other communities to be involved in that discussion as well. Perhaps we're seeing increasing speeds and a lot of risk in Ellesmere, so it would be good if that opportunity does arise again to include some of the other communities. Just on your report, you met with the Ellesmere College, and can I request that maybe next time councillors are involved if you do visit schools, if that's an opportunity there. And thirdly, the conversation with LGNZ coming to engage councillors on the Three Waters reform. Can I also, and depends how acceptable it is, ask for Ngāi Tahu to perhaps present to council at some stage as well, or representatives of the water group, please? Thank you.
Yeah, great. We can ask them that, and happy to have councillors along to the school visits, and probably between now and the end of the year we'll be visiting each school in Selwyn, or providing the opportunity to visit each school. We did this about 3 years ago, and just to encourage leadership, student leadership and growth within our schools. I think it's a really important part, thinking about civics and civics education. So those visits will be invited and occur, and be great to have councillors along. We've also, I think Bernie's touched base with each councillor around township visits, and to visit, walk up and down the town together, visit some particular places that you as ward councillors might like to have a think about. And at the moment, only a few people have responded. So if you do want to be a part of that and you'd like to, please get in touch with Bernie about those dates. And just note that, sorry, that not every date works for everyone, but you're keen to have you involved if you would like to be. Wondering if we have some names for a working group, if you want to land that today, or whether you'd like to do that in the future. Today is probably good just to clear it up.
I was going to nominate Councillor Miller.
Yeah, I think Miller would be great.
And I'm happy to be there if needed.
3 or 4. I mean, one's all right, but Epiha, Miller, McInnes. Great. Those 3 will be good. Yeah, you'll be a part of it from staff support for the group, and I'll be in there. And we're not going to create a terms of reference for this. It's not a formal subcommittee council at the moment. It's an informal group that will meet to understand information for dissemination to this group before any decisions made about where it goes. So, Councillor Alexander?
Yeah, happy to have a volunteers group peruse this material, and just ask that the material itself does get circulated to all councillors. So
yes.
Even if we're not part of this group, we can keep up with the play and feed our comments back.
Very important. Yeah, it's not a decision-making body, and we're not taking away any of the decision-making of this council through setting up this group. Mover and second, I'll move my report and put in a councillor as my alternate deputy mayor. Great. Is there someone else that would like to put their hand up? Councillor Epiha? Has? Anyone else? No? Murray?
Shane. Yes. Anybody else?
You can as chair of audit and risk as well, if that's going to be.
Oh, if it's necessary, but you just want one on the door.
We could have or in there. I'm planning on being there, so this is really just a covering all the bases.
Health or something like that.
Yeah, all right.
Councillors Shane Epiha and Murray Lemon as alternates, should I not be there. Yes.
Your Worship, councillors are invited to attend anyway. Is that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Seconder for that A and B, Councillor Lyle. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And we'll move to the District Licensing Committee update. Malcolm. Oh, the notice of motion. Sorry. Yes, we're going to do the notice of motion. Sorry, Malcolm. So the notice of motion is on page tab 14, 108 in the online diligent space. So notice of motion moved Councillor Miller and seconded Councillor Alexander that the Selwyn District Council will not agree to any transfer of water, wastewater or stormwater assets to any other entity without first undertaking full consultative process with the Selwyn community, which would involve papers, online, meetings in person, submissions. So we need to understand what this means. I think it's a really great thing that we confirm to the community. We just want to understand what we're committing ourselves to, and also I'll offer the opportunity for Councillor Miller and Councillor Alexander to speak on the motion. So Councillor Miller, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, your comments are timely, Sam. Thank you for that. I have got quite a bit to say, and I just want to take a wee bit of time because I think this is the single most important decision that all of us will make as councillors on our term, and perhaps even from the existence of this council. Regardless of what persuasion of the political spectrum you sit on, most people would regard safe water, access to water and sewage service as a fundamental right in New Zealand. And up until this date, my view of the world is that Selwyn District Council and its predecessors have been providing timely quality services. I accept that in the greater national picture, there are some councils that do have challenges and would benefit from reform. But the one-size-fits-all mantra, to me, I remain unconvinced that this actually assists within the Selwyn District Council. Some of the things that the central government's talking about is the source, the treatment, the quality, the quantity, charging mechanism, and those all apply to us. Particularly, we think about economic growth of where, when and how. How do we do that? How do we manage it? This entity may be slightly divorced from our aspirations as a community, our need to have infrastructure, perhaps in places which the entity doesn't believe it's warranted, but from a local perspective, we desire and want it. So I think some of the things that have been advertised have been spurious at best, particularly the decisions around staffing. Staffing is an issue that any entity will face. And I think the electricity and the plumbing guys have proven this, is that you create a pipeline through or through a training mechanism, that item is solved. But regardless of the entity, that issue will remain. We as a council have a sovereign debt rating, so the argument around able to borrow money cheaper doesn't stand water in Selwyn. As yet, I haven't seen any alternate options other than the proposal put forward. And I think as a council, we would like to see alternate options ranging from the status quo to the full amalgamation, because there is a range of options in between. The one-size-fits-all mantra does not fit Selwyn, particularly when you take into account Te Wāhora, the confluence of stormwater and waters running into it, the larger catchment we have involved. I think the Canterbury Water Management Strategy has done an excellent job of thinking about water management within Canterbury. Nowhere is that mentioned in the strategy about what this looks like, how that joins up with that. And so this one-size-fits-all mantra again has glossed over almost a decade of work around water management and water services within our area. I think, the unilateral decision on co-governance doesn't sit well with some of our ratepayers. They want to debate that as well, understand what that looks like. One of the failures, in my view, until date, is not letting Taumata Arawhai have a time to be established and actually identify entities that are suffering significant problems. For want of a better word, using the Christchurch City Council property analogy, the dirty 30, whatever that number is, that they find the people or the councils that have the issues, identify them and solve the issues, rather than applying a one-size-fits-all approach. Geographically, Selwyn is blessed with a flat topography, very easy to obtain quality water at source, and the ability to transport it and treat it and deliver it is done economically. Past ratepayers have, for a long time, in effect, paid it forward, because if you look at our debt profile, we have assets of around 610 million with debt of 40 million. When you look at other councils that are proposed to join the scheme, it's almost paying it backwards, is that they enjoy the facilities now, but future, and I include Selwyn this year, would pay for that cost of their proliferate behaviour. So a range of things concern me, particularly upsetting a nascent or growing relationship we have with Te Tamutu Rūtanga around what our water supplies look like. I think we have a very good relationship with our mayor, has a lot of credit to be taken for that, and I would not like to see that distributed. But if you look at on the piece of handout that they ask us to consider, benefits from reform, provide for future population growth, we can tick that box. Replace and refurbish existing infrastructure, we can tick that box, we're doing that. Upgrade Three Waters assets to meet drinking water and environmental standards, we're doing that. I think, if you refer to an international stage, the Obama call of yes we can is probably yes we are. And so where is the mandate for us to join this organisation to the detriment of our ratepayers both now and in the future? I'm not standing here today saying there's not a requirement for us or a beacon that says we should, but at the moment I remain totally unconvinced, and I really believe it's the largest transfer of asset from a community-driven provided organisation to a government entity ever. And just reflecting momentarily, show us the example of government reform on this scale which has been successful. I think we got a wake up last night, or the people in the North Island did, they had a brownout in electricity. The great electricity reforms are supposed to deliver us as consumers cheaper power, more reliability, and quality infrastructure. You'd hardly regard the delivery of electricity as a raging success. So I'm all for, at the moment, particularly keeping our assets within our Selwyn, managing them at an appropriate level, upgrading them as appropriate, and complying with Te Mata RFI. I think we can do that. There will be challenges for our communities, particularly around accepting what chlorination looks like. But that decision will not be driven by whether the entity is owned by Selwyn or whether it's owned by a third party. That decision will be driven by Te Mata RFI and its requirements for the residual disinfection. So it's a bit of a red herring there saying one or the other. Particularly if you look at the cost structures, saying that without reform we will have a $4,970 average bill. That's averaged over the whole South Island. It's not individualised to our council. The numbers particularly don't stack up around what's in the numbers, particularly depreciation, DCs, cost of funds. So as yet, I think we need a lot more information, particularly our community needs to be a lot more engaged in saying, are we up for this? If you look at the Auckland model, particularly you pay for water in and water out. I don't want to get to the stage here in Canterbury where you want to grow a vegetable garden, but it's cheaper to grow vegetables at the supermarket, buy them. So I'm taking a bit of time here, but I just want to stress how I perceive this to be the number one issue that we face as a council. And I think if we turn our feet into our ratepayers' shoes, it's one of the fundamental things that councils do. They say go back to basics. What is it? Water, roads, sewage, rubbish. Well, this is one of the big four, isn't it? And two, water and sewage. So the challenges perhaps are around stormwater. What will stormwater look like, particularly stormwater that goes to ground? Rollston is a particular example. But we can meet those challenges, and there are ways around it. And it doesn't matter whether it's us or a new entity doing it. The compliance standards will be the same. So the rationale for me putting this motion forward was, A, for us to be really clear with our community that we're going to ask them the question. B, I would like to see us develop over the next 8 weeks a very clear position, which we can actually put into the media about whether, yes, we see the benefits of reform and we tentatively believe it's in the best interest of our ratepayers, or no, at this stage, we don't believe the benefits are there both now and in the future. At the moment, I'm with the latter. Thank you, Your Worship.
Kia ora. Thank you, Grant, and thank you for asking me to second this notice of motion. We're often found on different sides of a debate at the council table, so it is significant that we have joined together in representing our community of the Selwyn district on this. I personally have not yet received enough information about the report to support the proposal to transfer Selwyn's Water's wastewater and stormwater assets to another entity. I haven't. And I wouldn't without asking the community. We don't own them, the community owns them. We, council and community, have had a decade of higher than average rate increases, particularly in our water rates and charges, to get our water, wastewater and stormwater into a good place, into an appropriate place. We're not finished. Our run-of-the-river suppliers are too frequently having boil water notices, but we're working to resolve this. So we're not perfect, but we're an awful way down the journey. There are other councils who, due to their size or willful negligence, have their water systems in a poor state. I have a great deal of sympathy for those small councils who struggle to pay for the upgrades for small communities. I have no sympathy for the big councils who willfully underrated for decades are now having their water systems collapse and blow up in their faces. Why should somebody else pay for those councils? I do not believe the figures the government has produced to date. I simply do not. I do not believe that there are the savings, in Selwyn at least, that the government predicts. I've been through 3, 4 LTPs as a member of this council. We don't have a bloated, overcharging Three Waters management system from which immediate savings can be made. The government's claim of 40% savings is a nonsense. Create a new entity. Create several new layers of bureaucracy to manage that entity. Borrow to pay the immediate bribe back to the councils that contribute. How on earth is that going to save money? There might be savings in procurement, but they're not going to be 40%. And then there's a scurrilous advertising campaign that the government's had in the media and on television. I think it's been insulting, damn near defamatory to our council staff and ourselves and our ratepayers. Our water systems are not what the government portrayed them as. I personally came very close to making a Broadcasting Standard Authority complaint about the quality of those ads. If a business advertised like that, they would have those complaints. Is this a sign of what's going to come? I think that we have to promise our ratepayers, and this is for me, this is a response to what our ratepayers are saying. They're saying, you're not going to give away our assets without asking us. And the answer is no. By agreeing to this, we're not going to go away. We are promising you, as your representatives, that your assets belong to you and it is your choice. If the government choose to take that choice away from us, so be it. They will answer at their next election. But we have a responsibility to our ratepayers, the people who have paid for these assets, and I believe this is an appropriate resolution to pass. I urge you all to support it, that it would be a meaningful statement if it was carried with unanimous support. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. The other councillors that would like to speak to this without dragging out probably what's the inevitable. I have not heard too many people thinking that this is something we shouldn't do, and there's other items in the meeting today that we'd like to cover, but Councillor Lemon.
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and I won't drag it out. You're right, it's been more than eloquently spoken to as a resolution. Just really a process question. I had both yourself and David with DIA and government. Is there any suggestion that we won't be able to consult at this stage?
The only, so the Minister has said that she wants this reform to work because it works without moving to a mandatory space. The only way I can see us not having to consult is when it's not our decision.
Correct.
And so that would be, if Cabinet determined that it was made mandatory, that would be then up to them to do the consultation, not us.
I guess that's the point I'm making, is that we have a statutory obligation to consult, I believe, unless we're mandated by central government that we cannot, which would be reprehensible in my view anyway, but it would not then be our decision. So I'm very happy to support this motion.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm not going to vote against this, just so you know. The only point that I'd like to make is that if we're going to go to a consultation on and making the point that this is a very large decision that the community should be part of, I'm not saying that we don't try to consult as well as we possibly can normally, but there are certain portions of the community that find it far easier to engage with our consultations as they are normally run than other parts of the community. So the loudest voices turn up all the time. They're often the ones who also shout for low rates, which is how some councils got into this sort of position. People who work full time, work away from the area, busy weekends, whatever else. Those are the ones who generally don't have the time, energy or money to engage in this sort of thing. But if we're going to do this, we actually need to make a conscious effort to include everybody, like more than usual. Otherwise, it's basically the same sector of the population always getting the loudest say. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. And we'll take that into consideration when we get to the point where we have to make that decision. The one good thing, I suppose, about the advertising, as poor as it's been, is that there's national recognition of an issue, whether that's on printed media, TV, Facebook. There's not the Selwyn specific piece, but there's a conversation that's happening, hopefully, within our community. Yeah.
Just as well that, yeah, there's a lot of conversation, there's been a lot of advertising, there's also an awful lot of confusion. There's not been enough information for us here. There's a lot of confusion around the difference between Three Waters reform and drinking water regulations with Taumata Arowai, and it's all getting conflated together. So if anybody's going to make their personal vote somewhere, we need to, I don't know how, because it's really confusing. It's so complex. But yeah, it's.
Thank you, Grant and Mark. I am going to support the recommendation that's been put forward, but it's important that when we do go out to consultation that we actually have clear understanding of what's in Three Waters and what's not. We had an issue with regards to understanding where in the rural community, with regards to one or two properties, what's their responsibility with regards to supplying safe water to workers if they're supplying a water supply to more than one. The other is with regards to stormwater. Are swales in, are swales out? Is it just a piped stormwater system? I'd like some clarity around that. I do understand, I think at this time, lane drainage is out, but I haven't heard to the contrary. So I think when we do go out to consultation, for the rural community, we need to clearly understand what is in and what is out. The urban may be a lot clearer than what our rural community responsibilities are under these Three Waters.
And so the two issues you've raised, Debbie, the first one's about drinking water standards, and that currently sits with Taumata Arowai legislation, which I think is still in the select committee. And the initial work that came out was said any supply serving more than one household was captured. We'll wait and see what the select committee process throws out at the other end. And the second piece around land drainage, I've asked the Minister a couple of times in public meetings whether land drainage was in or out, and it was in. Talking with her again and DIA staff at meetings over the last couple of weeks, their reference to land drainage tends to come down to piped land drainage pieces, which is only a very small part of land drainage as we understand it. So it doesn't include gutters and swales, it includes the pipes. So I think that's still an area that, as you say, needs to be further clarified before any decision will be made.
Tēnā tātou, Your Worship, thank you very much. I'm happy to support this notice of motion. In terms of the consultative process, I think clearly as a council, what I'm hearing from ratepayers is that the figures that are being presented at the moment, there's a lot of speculation in those, and they're questioning the integrity of the figures that have been put forth by the government. So I think in terms of consultative process, we need to be very clear on our position, clearly stating our financial position to our ratepayers moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And David, just a comment from you around full consultative process. That's clear enough for you and staff to understand what it is that we are requesting of you. Should we get to this point?
Yeah. So I've been taking some notes in terms of what that will look like. I'll develop a paper and present it to the working party next week. Circulate when we have our first meeting, circulate to councillors. We do have a limited time. We need to make sure that we're clear on the information that we're going to the community is accurate, and it's around purpose, etc. So allow us a few days to develop that, Mr. Mayor.
I think that'll take more than a few days. And this is, good, because this is actually about what we do post 30th of September, when we understand what the answers are from the current piece of work. So moved and seconded, Miller and Alexander. Thanks for the conversation that we've had. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Thank you. And Malcolm, we'll jump to District Licensing Committee now. Thanks.
Kia ora koutou, good afternoon. You have my report in front of you. I just want to update you on a couple of matters that are in the report. First off, you'll see the reference to the very serious assault that occurred on May the 15th. Now, that matter is still before the court. The man's been charged with that. The victim is making a better than expected recovery, which is good. Having said that, though, he's going to be off work for a year, so it gives you some idea of just how serious that assault was. Police have yet to decide whether there'll be any charges in relation to the intoxication that were in the licensed premises on that night, so I'll brief you on that further later on. The June controlled purchase operation, where a local licensed premise sold 4 bottles of bourbon to a 16-year-old, police have referred that to the Alcohol Regulatory Licensing Authority. I'll probably know in around about 2 to 3 months what the result of that is, so I'll report back to you once we find out further in relation to that. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that the Winter Festival on the 24th of July at Larkham's Vineyard was a huge success. It was very popular, 600 attendees in the end, and no problems. So that was one highlight for me for the month. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Kia ora, Malcolm. Thank you for that. Any questions that councillors have on the report? Mover and seconder that we received the report. Lyle and Epiha. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Thank you, Malcolm. The next item on our agenda is the Community Services and Facilities update, and ask Denise Kidd and staff to come to the front of the room. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. You have received the report from the Community Services and Facilities Group for the 2 month ending the 30th of June. That timing has allowed us to do a full year view as well as a comparison with the previous year. It's important to note that with COVID-19 and with the various openings of facilities, neither year is a typical year. However, it does provide a picture for you. Any questions you have from that report, I'm happy to respond to at the end of the updates. The report talks about tabling this final strategic events plan, and I just wanted to draw to your attention that there's been some last minute editing that has yet to take place, so that will be sent directly to councillors in the week of the 23rd of August. There are 4 things that I'd like to highlight that have taken place in the intervening period since the report was prepared, and in addition, there is a very brief Selwyn Youth Council video. The 4 things are the whakatau whare, the blessing, a collaboration involving the Ministry of Social Development, workshops being planned with 24 committees, and the Selwyn Awards. Just in in terms of the whakatau whare, the purpose of such a blessing is to settle the building, and it needs to be completed in terms of its build. It needs to be safe for people to access and walk through the entire building, and it needs to be able to accommodate those who want to attend. On the proposed date, we've had a few things. They are not significant in terms of the overall building program, but a few things that will impact on that whakatau whare date. So we've therefore changed the date of that blessing to Friday, September the 17th at a similar time. So later today or tomorrow, Sam will re-invite councillors to the revised date, and we will follow up with the remaining invitees as well. In terms of the collaboration, Ministry of Social Development has provided some funding to council to deliver a range of internships within council for Selwyn job seekers, with a particular focus on young people. As well, council is committed as part of the arrangement to a series of taster opportunities with a particular focus on Selwyn secondary students. This funding comes from a fund which has the goals of mana manaki, building the mana of Selwyn job seekers, registered unemployed, underemployed, school students, and youth at risk of poor outcomes, and uplifting them. For this initiative, council is working in collaboration with Youth Pathways Trust, Te Ara Rangatahi. This collaboration starts next week with planning and preparation for the first internship, as well as a parent caregiver with young person opportunity to book in to an evening and talk with different council staff about pathways in their career. We will provide more information to you in the next report. In terms of the planned workshops, as agreed by council, a series of workshops are being planned for members of 24 Selwyn committees, commonly associated with residents groups, citizens groups, or community committees. The workshops are intended to consider the current 24 committees and whether they are an effective mechanism for Selwyn residents, and what needs to happen to retain them and what may need to change. The collective feedback from these workshops will be summarised and put in a report to council later in the year. Councillors have an important role at these workshops to host and to welcome, to listen, and to provide information and advice as appropriate. It will be externally facilitated, and there will be a structure associated with how the meeting is run, and I'm happy to share that structure with those that are interested. Finally, in terms of the Selwyn Awards, I'll just ask Kelsey to talk to you about that.
Thank you. So I just wanted to highlight some key stats excuse me, from the event, just noting that a final summary will be included in the October report. So in 2021, we had 450 attendees, up from 335 in 2018. We had a total of 117 applications, up from 50 in 2020, and we had, 2018, sorry, and we had 6,779 People's Choice votes, which is up from 2,393 in 2018. This year in sponsorship, we received $97,636 in sponsorship, and which is up from 54,000 in 2018. So to elevate the event this year, we did incur additional costs, but that was offset by the additional sponsorship.
Thank you.
This is the video from the night.
Finally, just an update from the Selwyn Youth Council and a subcommittee of that council who've been working on funding.
Kia ora, my name is Aaron, and I am this year's secretary for the Selwyn Youth Council. Being a secretary mainly means that I manage minutes, do correspondence, as well as a wee bit of networking on the side. I'm also on this year's Finance and Property Committee. One of the things we're working on is investigating our approach towards our tertiary scholarships that we hand out every year. We've mainly done this by generating new ideas in things such as interviews and meetings. We've also conducted meetings with careers advisors around Selwyn to gain a better picture. All of this work was done in order to find a few key things. One of the things was to find a way to target a wider population of our youth in Selwyn. This is just so that we don't get people who are only book smart, but we also get people who are good at trades, as well as sports and cultural activities as well. Another thing we had a wee look at was how we could market these scholarships so that we could get as many candidates as possible and give our money to the people who deserve it the most. Another thing we had a wee look at was how we could support people who promote our scholarship so that we could make their life easier. All of this information and all of these ideas we found were incorporated into this year's rollout of our scholarships. Another project we've been working on is a joint campaign with the Ashburton Youth Council on mental health. This is because both regions found an increased need to spread awareness on positive mental well-being among our youth. We've mainly done this by organising events such as a social media campaign to spread awareness, as well as a school mufti day. We've also got a lot more in the works that we'd love to share with you at a later date.
Hi, I'm Connor Buckley. I'm a Youth Council Treasurer and I'm a member of the Finance and Funding portfolio. And we just finished doing our survey work, and we're going to move into a new room now to talk about our portfolio. One of the things that the finance and funding portfolio has done among the many interesting changes that we've introduced this year is we've established our funding committee that is composed of one person from each youth council portfolio team. And that's to provide more inclusiveness and more input from the youth council as a whole to determine the youth funds, who will be receiving the youth fund, which is a discretionary fund available to youth in the Selwyn area. There's currently $6,000 in it. And previously, there were only 2 rounds per year for funding applications. We've extended that to 4 to provide more chances for people to apply and to receive funding and to make it overall more equitable. Last round, we funded 2 applications, one about dance music therapy in the community and one around a Matariki event. We are looking forward to promoting the fund and being able to support the community and deliver indicatives targeted at the youth of Selwyn. And it's hoped that by improving our youth funding systems from previous years, we will be able to achieve this and support youth in Selwyn. Yeah.
Thank you. That concludes the report. So any question?
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Denise Kelsey, for the report, and congratulations again on the Selwyn Awards night. It was absolutely brilliant. Just pertaining to the community committees workshops, Denise, and you've talked about facilitator and our role in the process. I just wonder if it would be useful if we had just maybe a 15-minute session at one of our briefing sessions before those events kick off, just that we are aligned and we are all on the same page when we get there. On a note in your report, very timely to note that's not to revisit the decision around this table. And I think that is quite crucial for the tending committees to understand that it's about the way forward. But I think I just think it would be beneficial that we're all aligned on one page before we did that. And we knew what our roles, specifically you've talked about our roles as facilitator, not as facilitators, sorry, as hosts and greeting and introducing, but it would be great if we had some consistency around that, I think. So thank you.
I just want to highlight on page 38, great work done by Denise and her team in enabling a significant piece of artwork to come to Lincoln, the Lou Summers piece, which came to the heart of our town, which has, in the opinions of most people, significantly enhanced the view, which used to be the old Chinese takeaway. So Douglas Marshall knocked it down with his hammer, which is great work, and Denise and her team managed to develop something that's, I think, that we within New Zealand could be innovative and cutting edge, in that very few people enable sculpture hire or sculpture lease on long term, and they've got a pro forma way of doing it now that we can roll it out across the district. But we can integrate public art into our communities at relatively modest cost and have pieces like this, which would be on the means of our communities to be in our communities. So great work, Denise, and your team, and it's significantly enhanced Lincoln. Unfortunately, I nominated the Lincoln Community Committee for the Selwyn Awards for their work on public art promotion. They weren't successful, but this is the second piece that I've managed to get within the community, so well done to them.
I'd just like to highlight the numbers of people through our facilities. So really good to know that when we build things, you know, they have actually been really well used, and big investment by councillors over time to get to the place where we've been able to deliver, particularly the Selwyn Sports Centre, and to see it, 47,000 people a month through that facility is just huge uptake. So well done to the staff and managing that number of people, and also thinking about how the area is programmed to ensure that there's things that it's not just a building, there's actually a lot going on inside and interaction with people. So well done there. And for the awards, as was mentioned earlier, it's excellent. It's great to have a comprehensive report that covers off the areas that are going on and a lot of our connection with the community. Thank you. Mover and seconder to receive this report. McInnes and Mugford. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thank you very much. Next item is 11, private plan change 61, rezoning land in Darfield East. And I'll invite John Sean to come to the front of the room. It's on page 58 of today's agenda. There are A, B, C, D and E. Firstly, A, accept the recommendation from Independent Commissioner in regards to the plan change. B, pursuant to clause 29.4, approve the plan change 61, subject to the modifications described. Approve the public notification of the decision. D, delegate team-led strategy and policy to take steps necessary to give effect to those decisions, and delegate to the team leader strategy and policy to make any steps necessary to give effect to make plan change 61 operative at the conclusion of the appeal period where no appeals are filed. So Tim and John, the floor's yours.
Kia ora koutou, everyone. Look, I don't have too much to add further to my report. The attached is the Commissioner's decision from the hearing on the 16th of April, which concluded on the 13th of May. The Commissioner recommended that the plan change be accepted. And essentially the decision you have to make is whether to accept the Commissioner's recommendation as is, whether to accept it with any amendments you wish to add, or whether to decline the plan change. My recommendation is to accept the Commissioner's recommendation. Yeah, happy to take any questions you may have or clarify anything in the report.
Thank you. It seems like there's a very thorough process that's been through, and there's a lot of change through the process around what the plan change actually involves delivering, and some of the suggestions and amendments that have been put forward, and particularly pleased to see the connections to State Highway 73, on the very boundary of this particular plan change. But that traffic safety piece is hugely important, particularly given the mixed use of land use that's involved in this plan change. A couple of speakers, Deborah and Murray.
Thank you. Look, 5.8 on the Commissioner's report, water. I note that I just wanted to ask a question. Is this plan change dependent on the availability of water being found by the new well been drilled and consented? And the firefighting requirements, it was assumed could be met, but I'm just asking whether this decision is dependent on that new bore being drilled and consented as being adequate.
So my understanding is if the bore is unsuccessful, and I notice Murray's in the room, so I may defer to him on this, but if the bore is unsuccessful, then there has to be a cap on the amount of water used. I don't know if I can defer to Murray just perhaps to
No, yes, you have the answer correct. So I probably don't have to come out here. So the basic situation is if the bore is unsuccessful, which it's not, we've actually found a good source of water. But if we can't get it consented, then they'll have a restricted connection for the development. If the bore's consented, which we expect it will be, well, then they can have on-demand connection.
Sorry, there was a question. Sorry, I note there was a question around connections to the sewage system, and whether at 5,000 square metre section sizes they could actually be serviced individually. Do they have to connect to the system? Just trying to clarify.
I'll give you my opinion, and then I'll let the answer come out. So my opinion is that they should connect to the Darfield sewer system.
It would make a lot of sense if they did, from a cost point of view. Also, they wouldn't need a consent from Environment Canterbury to discharge to land. So connection to the sewage network would be, I would have thought, would be advantageous to the development.
And the developer's aware that the pipeline's going in that our council decision was that all new connections, all new properties will connect, and that there's a time frame around the delivery of that project. So, like, the information is freely available, and you've got, the developer knows that information.
I believe the developer would be aware of that. The hearing concluded before the decision was made, so the question was left on the table somewhat. But since then, the decision has been made. The commissioner does opine that it would make sense to connect to the wastewater system.
Thank you. Murray and Grant.
I'll just quickly add to that, Sam. Sorry, I just say that we are already in early discussions with the developer on connection to the wastewater system and how that would work.
My question's of a similar nature, I guess, and it's really just around clarification as why in the Commissioner's decision it wasn't mandated that there was a connection. That would just give us as governors some clarity and reassurance around that. Tim, if you're able to, I know we spoke briefly before the meeting, if you're able to clarify.
Yes, sorry, I missed the first part of your...
It's just really around why it wasn't mandated by the Commissioner and whether we have any way of mandating that post the decision.
I believe it might have been a timing issue. At the time the Commissioner was hearing the matter, I don't think Darfield Sewerage had quite got over the line. At this stage, the matter has been considered in the decision, some discussion around it. The Commissioner has decided not to impose any conditions or rules around the compulsory joining up with the reticulation. So at this point, my strong view is that the Council cannot add a resolution or try and put in another condition to make that the case, because the matter's already been dealt with. As John said, your job here today is really to accept the recommendation or not. However, I can reassure the Council that there will be other triggers which the Council has in terms of subdivision and even building consent, where we can actually force the matter in terms of connection to the reticulation. So just to give you some assurances that there will be, if it's there in time, which I understand is the middle of next yearish, I think, from memory, the availability of reticulation in Darfield, and the pipe goes right along that road frontage. So it's quite an easy connect. This has got to be waited before it actually gets any development on the site. There has to be a subdivision application, et cetera, and I think there's a wee way to go. So what I'm saying is that the pipes will be in place by the time this comes round, and at that point we'll have a strong hand of cards to be able to force the connection. Anecdotally, the developer is actually looking forward to the reticulation. It's part of his marketing mechanism. This will be one of the first reticulated subdivisions in Darfield, and has expressed no interest in terms of the cost and the time of putting in a package proposal for his own subdivision. Equally, ECAN have indicated that they will be taking a slightly different approach to on-site applications from now on. So putting all that together, I hope it gives some confidence that we will get connections for this development when it happens.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I concur with all of what you're saying. I would have perspective it's rather than forward funding a treatment plant, pay as you go on connections would seem, looking from my perspective, to be the feasible way to go. So I take some reassurance from that. Thank you.
You've largely answered the question. I think just a sort of supplementary question to it. If someone buys a section and chooses to put a secondary unit in, we would still charge them a sewage connection because the sewage is passing by their front gate?
I think that's a decision for the Council to make, and I think it's within the scope of their powers to make that the case.
Not today, though, is it not?
No, not today. Right now, we're looking at a plan change, and
you were talking about amendments to this decision. There's no amendments available, is there, to us?
Not of any substantive nature, and this would be something that I think, in my view, would not be possible or unlawful.
Thank you, Councillor Lemon. Seconded Gallagher. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thank you, John. Next item is Water Services Monthly Update. Item number 12, page 97 of today's agenda, and invite Murray and Elaine to the room.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. We've got the Council's Five Waters report. It's a monthly report we bring through to you, starting on page 97. So I'll let Elaine start off talking about the recovery to the flooding we had a little earlier on.
Thank you. So the majority of the flood recovery section can be taken as read, but there's just a few items that I'd like to flag or touch on. One of them being that all the water treatment plant recovery or remediation works have been completed, but there are just a few minor items outstanding, and they're mainly items that are awaiting drier conditions around treatment plants or in the network to complete, and they'll be done as soon as possible in spring. And that kind of leads on to the just highlighting the Acheron River works. So that's probably the largest piece of ongoing works. And although we've completed the work with the pipeline itself, we're just currently doing the final stages of the river restoration works, and they should be completed by the end of the month. Weather permitting, the last few days have put a little bit of a standstill on that. And then the same, just touch on stormwater. So all the emergency works have been completed. We've cleared a number of culverts, and we're still working with KiwiRail to get access to clear the internal of a couple of the KiwiRail culverts around Springfield. And as with water, there's a few remediation items that are just waiting for the drier conditions before we can complete them. And so following on from that, we've obviously done the initial flooding assessments, and they've been undertaken by staff, and we're just in the process of engaging a consultant to continue with the investigation works and then look at providing some future mitigation options. And then following on from the flood recovery, one item that isn't mentioned in the report is just on water races. And at the moment, we've got 14 water race closures being publicly advertised on the website, so they're up for comment if anyone wants to.
Okay, I take there's no comments on that. I'll move on, or any comments? Perfect. Okay, so we're now moving on to the three water reform section of the report. So this is page 99. And it's really just to bring it to your attention. This information is out there. I'm not planning on going through it in any sort of depth of detail, but the first one is a local dashboard release. Local dashboards have been released by DIA and pulled together elements of evidence based on one and all into one place for councils and the community, so they can see the potential local impacts with and without the Three Waters reform. And I've got a couple of examples in the appendix of the report. The first one shows Selwyn's dashboard, and the second one shows that of Waimakere District Council. They're actually very similar. If you look at the economic section in green, both sets of numbers are exactly the same. In terms of operations, numbers are a wee bit different, but that's probably how they count consultants, internal staff, contractors. We've got a different structure than what they do. Top right-hand corner, performance. We're both given a performance of 3, which is performing in line with expectations. I was just going to touch very briefly in the section of financial stage. I'm obviously not an accountant, so it'd be wrong for me to dwell too much in this space, but just pointing out a couple of differences. One is probably our debt. So if you look at Waimakere's, the scale at the bottom goes up to 100 million, where ours goes to 20 million, and you can see the difference between debt and revenue. That would suggest to me that we're in a reasonably positive position in that regard. Just above that, there's a graph going out 10 years, and the main difference between us and the Waimak District Council would be the funding we have in growth. So we're very much, as we know, a growth-centred council, and our budgets sort of indicate that. Waimak have more budgets potentially in terms of renewals, showing an older network. The last thing is right at the top of the financials. It talks about the average household cost per annum. So there's numbers and there's numbers, and you sort of take that for what it is. At the moment, it's saying that our cost per household is $1,190. That calculation, if you back calculate, it's actually based on revenue divided by how many connections we have, and the revenue includes things like trade waste revenue and DC, so it's not quite what you expect it to be. Anyway, just to say that there's a couple of predictions there, and there's some more work that council is doing internally in terms of staff, and that will come to you as council at a later date. So probably I'll touch on that. I'll move on to local government. Government and local government New Zealand heads of agreement. This is for your information. You know that document has been signed. It's not saying that we as staff have been involved in, but it's saying that has happened out there, and there's a couple of links to those documents for your reference. Again, the reform package going to race through it pretty quickly, but the government has put up $2.5 billion support package. And that's to help local governments transition through the reforms to New Zealand's drinking water, wastewater and stormwater services. There's two parts to that. One is $2 billion, which is the better off component, and there's also a $500 million, the no worse off component. So there's two parts to that. It's interesting how that's funded. So the Crown is funding the first $1 billion, and I think one of the councillors mentioned earlier on, but the $1.5 billion is actually going to be funded by the water services entities themselves as debt starting off. So it's just bringing it to attention. I thought it was an interesting little fact. Probably the main part that I want to talk about in my report is the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, and there's additional recommendation in this report that I'm hoping Council will agree to. Perhaps I'll just read that out. That's delegate to the Chief Executive the ability to prepare and submit an expression of interest to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund. So now I'll tell you what that's about before you hopefully will approve that. But the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund is a contestable fund of at least $1 billion for infrastructure investment to unlock housing development in the short to medium term. To be eligible for that, it needs to be new infrastructure or upgrading infrastructure for transport, three waters, or flood management. And it's wholly or primarily for the purpose of building new houses. And this investment should at least enable 200 additional dwellings. Skimming all the way through the bottom of the page, to unlock future growth potential on Rolleston, staff are proposing to apply for funding of wastewater reticulation upgrades, including 2 new wastewater pump stations and a pressure main, to the value of $22 million, and that will unlock a further 3,000 homes. So I think we've got a reasonable chance, well, a good chance to anybody else at obtaining this fund. It is a two-step process. So this is an expression of interest. The government then looks at all of those, and then there's a detailed process to go through, and that would come back to council before signing up on anything. We don't know what the terms are. We don't know if it's a loan or it's free cash or how it's going to play out, but it sounds like it's a worthwhile thing to go for. So that's what we're proposing. Over the page, last but not least, is consultation on the proposed regulations, fees and charges for drinking water suppliers. So this is basically some fees and charges that Taumata ROI are looking at putting in place once they stand up. One is to assess temporary drinking water supplies. So if you have a big event and you're installing a temporary supply for that period, then there's a fee for them to assess that to make sure it's fit for purpose. There's a fee for general exemptions, and I suppose one that's of most interest to this council would be the exemption for residual disinfection. So in that proposal, they're proposing a fee of $5,200 plus $130 an hour after the first 40 hours for any additional costs incurred. And we've talked about the exemption before, but basically it's a process where councils will apply. Taumata ROI has said they're going to bring in a range of international experts to review each application. I suppose there's a cost associated with that, and that's, in our opinion, fair and reasonable. But just to draw your attention that that's coming on, whether you want our council to make a submission on that or provide staff comments. As I say, we're happy with what they're proposing, but just put that to you as well. So I might pass on to Elaine now to talk briefly about the stimulus funding, and then we'll hand it back to you, Sam.
So just probably one quick comment on the stimulus funding. So the Darfield to Pines pipeline project kicked off this week with Cyclone on site. So there's been a lot of pipe delivered to be stored at the Pines, and you might have seen the road closure associated with that, but that's started and that's in progress. So I think that's the most important message. Thank you.
John, thanks for the update. A couple of questions. One is on the dashboard data. We come out as a 3 underperformance, performing in line with expectations, which is good. But there are some numbers that are performing above expectations. And I guess I was a little bit surprised when I saw that we were a 3. Wondering, have you done any analysis of why we ended up as a 3? And is there like 1 or 2 things that we're not doing that they were looking for a checkbox in that would have lifted our performance? Because 3 to reading in line with expectation is we're kind of just the same as everyone else.
So there's probably some more work to be done in that regard, but we have sort of flicked through and seen how other councils do, because that's the first reaction that you do. And we were surprised with some results being better than we expected, and also surprised that some were then worse than expected. So that's probably all I can say at this point, but we can come back to you on that.
Okay, cool. And maybe the small group can have a look into that too. Okay. And secondly, on the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, I think, let's think about how we support that. It's a good thing to introduce, and There's a subgroup of councillors that were doing some work with Kāinga Ora looking at the area of Halpit, and Broadlands Drive was upgraded or put in. That would also access different opportunities on the Halpit site as well. So the second thing that could be included in that application. Councillor Alexander.
Thank you. And thank you. You did touch on my first one I was going to make, is the government's generous offer of $2.5 billion. It wasn't $2.5 billion from the government. It's $1 billion of government funding, and it's $1.5 billion on the new entity. So before the new entity gets off the ground, it's having to borrow $1.5 billion to pay back to the people whose assets it's stealing. Remarkable. And then they say this is going to save money, starting with $1.5 billion of debt. Remarkable. I wish I could use figures quite as well as that. I'm concerned that I seek reassurance that any application to this insurance acceleration fund isn't going to be sort of locking us into joining the system. That if our ratepayers, who we said earlier in today, are going to have the choice to join or not, give up our assets or not, that if we're not sort of locking ourselves in ahead of time by taking this funding, we're not locking ourselves into giving away our assets.
Yeah, so there's no terms and conditions, but that's something we'll definitely be keeping an eye out for. And if that is the case, we'll be bringing it to your attention.
Thank you. And the other
So,
comment,
Mark, on that, the two funds aren't linked in any way that I'm aware of. So we can do some research to confirm that, but the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund is not water specific.
right, thank you. I just want to make sure that we're not sort of inadvertently committing ourselves to a process we may not want to commit ourselves to. And my other final comment is, I do hope we're going to get a transfer fee, much like a sports club would get for you and your staff. If at some point we transfer you to this new entity, I think you're worthy of a very high transfer fee. And that I would look for us to get, not only get payment for the assets that we're transferring, but also the very skilled and very knowledgeable and very approachable staff.
That's very kind. Thank you. You should have a finder's fee too.
The IAF fund, if you were successful, would that reduce the amount of DC we could complain from the developers that would be a benefit from those? Because it seems like we might be giving a small portion of our community a free hit, where we still want to collect that DC to put on our wider network. So it sort of feels great, but are we actually really collecting it from where it should be? We've been very successful in general terms around our DC collection. I've a secondary question after that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And part of the funding, it says, we don't want you to be subsidising developers, or if you've got funding in your community, we don't want to be subsidising it either. So I'm not quite sure where some of the funding would come from. I imagine it might well be some sort of a loan sort of period. So we'd have to recover that cost from developers regardless. Yeah, but we'll keep that in mind as well. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
One of the downsides of being here a bit longer is that you get to see things that you thought were rubbish actually be proven to be rubbish. Unfortunately, that was the Glen Tunnel water intake for the water race when I was chair of Water and Risk. Both the locals and the committee were very concerned about the quality of construction and the methodology of construction and the risk that would face from a water event, large-scale flood event. And our worst fears have proven to be true. That was demolished, the intake. So I guess I'm concerned about what the rebuild looks like, who's planning it, what's it going to be like, and will it take into account the original concerns that were raised around the quality of the design and implementation.
Yes, that was around the river works and diversion of flood flows. We can come back to you on that.
If you recall, when it was first set up, they basically scalped all the trees, put a very small diversion barrier in place. The gravel bund with some of the construction was questionable, and it was made to operate. But I suppose history has proven us that that was what we thought it was going to be. You say?
Well, Mark, you.
I was just going to say, I think we probably also want to reflect on the mode of failure and how that happened and what damage was done and what works we're doing. So that's why we're happy to do that.
What I'm concerned about is that the rebuild takes into account the design for the future.
Kia ora, Murray Lane. Thanks very much for your report. I guess I'd just like to support Sam in referring to my earlier comments around integrity in the numbers, and if we're going to go to public consultation, really dive down into that dashboard to make sure that's correct. Just secondly, around the water services bill and the regulations, Taumata Arawai are currently assessing disinfecting activities outlined below that. the event organisers, e.g. a music festival, does there currently exist a fee? Is there a fee at the moment? Or is that proposed fee an increase?
Yes, so there's no fee at the moment, but Murray Washington was keen to add something. He signalled as well.
No, I wasn't going to comment on the fee, but all of those fees are new.
Yep.
And there's no existing fee structure for approval because there is no approvals required. Might be a good time to dive in. The Water Services Bill is actually receiving its second reading in Parliament today. We haven't had the opportunity yet to see if there's been any significant changes to what was proposed in the first draft. But I do note a couple of points in the preamble, which basically notes that the Chief Executive of Te Mata Arawhai will have the power to waive the requirement of any supply to meet regulations, which is an interesting catch-all. And second one is that the Chief Executive will have the ability to waive the requirement for mandatory disinfection as long as they meet their water safety plans and for a limit of no more than 5 years before having to reapply. So there is a wee bit of discretion being built into the Water Services Bill. What we'll do is we'll bring back any changes to a subsequent council meeting to alert of any change in philosophy.
Thanks, Sam. I guess it's just a commentary around those, as I've been listening to Shane talking about those, just a commentary around the impact that those fees may have on us if we go as a standalone model, and possibly something we need to slot into our discussions when we, with the subcommittee that's been formed, or the group that's been formed, to understand if we were not to opt in, whether these will have a material impact on our funding model. So yeah, just a commentary there.
Yeah, just trying to understand the retrospective consent for the work at Hororata. I thought it was done under emergency, so any of those we still have to go back and get a consent even though we've finished the job. And roughly, what is the cost of those consents?
I can't tell you the cost off the top of my head, Rob, but what we do have to do is where he kind of asked us to go and get retrospective consents, and they haven't asked for that in all situations, but particularly in the Hororata one, that's where we have to do it. So
just seems pointless to me that once you've done the job, you then ask if you can do it. Just seems quite strange once you've already done it, because what are they going to do if they don't like what you've done?
Yeah, we're just doing what we're told.
Item on the agenda is document signed and sealed. Moved Councillor Lyle and seconded Mugford. Any discussion on those items? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Resolution to exclude the public. Mover and seconder. Moved Lyle, seconded Reid. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And I think we'll just start at 3 o'clock, just to give us a round time frame.